this month we're going to be talking about verse 27 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. The previous four verses, 23, 24, 25 and 26, were all specifically about ego. From verse 27, Bhagavan is particularly focusing on the practice, though the practice is actually there in most of the verses. He's making a reference to the practice of self-investigation. For example, in the verse immediately before the four verses, these four verses about the ego, he said, consider, that's verse 22, he said, consider, except by turning the mind back within, completely immersing it in God, who shines within the mind, who shines within that mind, giving light to the mind, how to fathom God by the mind. In other words, the implication there, it's only by turning our mind back within, that means back towards ourselves, and thereby completely immersing it in our real nature, which is God, that we can know God. So he was emphasizing practice there. In verse 23, when he begins to talk about ego, he ends by saying, contemplate with a subtle mind where this I rises. And in the Kalivemba version, he modified that sentence to mean when one contemplates by a subtle mind where this I rises, it slips away. Verse 24 doesn't actually make any specific reference to practice, but it is a definition of terms. What ego, Chit-Jatagranti and other terms all refer to this one rising I, which is neither the body nor the real awareness. Verse 25, he's talking about how this ego comes into existence and how it endures. And he says, again, he refers to practice, saying, if one seeks it, or if it is sought, or if it seeks itself, or however we choose to interpret it, it all amounts to the same. So if it's sought, it will take flight. And in verse 26, he ends by saying, know that investigating what this ego is alone is giving up everything. So he's referring to the practice constantly throughout the verses. Just as in verse 22, he implied that we cannot know God except by turning the mind back within, back towards ourselves, that means, and thereby completely immersing it in him. The same emphasis that self-investigation is the only way is also implied here in verse 27. So this verse consists of 3 sentences and one final imperative term. The first sentence of this verse is nāṇudiyādu uḻḷanilai, nāmaduvā uḻḷanilai. That means the state in which one exists without I rising is the state in which we exist as that. Nāṇudiyādu means without I rising. I here, what is the I that rises? It's only ego. So he's referring to the state in which the ego doesn't arise. But he says nāṇudiyādu uḻḷanilai. That can mean the state that exists without I rising, or the state in which I exist without rising, or the state in which one exists without I rising. It can be taken anyway, but it all amounts to the same thing. So that state in which the ego doesn't arise, in which one just is without the ego arising, that is the state, nāmaduvā uḻḷanilai. That is the state in which we exist as that. Here, that is referring to adu, that is referring to the ultimate reality, what is generally called Brahman, the one infinite whole, which that is our real nature. That is, Brahman is not something other than ourselves. It is what we actually are. and that is pure awareness. So the state, so long as we rise, so long as ego rises, it is we who are rising as ego. So we are thereby not abiding as we really are, which is as Brahman. But if the state in which ego doesn't arise, that is the state in which we are abiding as we are that. That is the state in which we exist without, we exist as we actually are. That is a pure awareness. Awareness uncontaminated by the appearance of any other thing. That means, because when this I rises, everything rises, as he said in the previous verse. When I doesn't exist, nothing else exists. When ego doesn't exist, nothing else exists. So the state in which one exists without I rising is the state of egolessness, in which without I rising, nothing else rises. So what exists in that state is only the ultimate reality, Brahman, which is what we actually are. So that is the state in which we are that. In other words, Bhagavan is indirectly saying the state that is referred to by Mahavakyas such as I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi, or Tattvamasi, you are that. That is the state in which I does not rise, ego does not rise. In the Kalivemba version, Bhagavan extended this first sentence by adding before it a relative clause, mudal pol mevam, which appears as if the first, followed by a inda. Inda is a proximal demonstrative determiner. In other words, it's the equivalent of this in English, but not this as a pronoun, but this as a determiner, as a what used to be called a demonstrative adjective. So it's both this mudal pol mevam, which appears as if for first, and inda, the determiner this, both are referring to the ego. So with this Kalivemba extension, the whole sentence means, the whole sentence reads, mudal pol mevam in the nāṉudiyādu uḻḷanilai, nāmaduvā uḷḷanilai. That means the state in which one exists without this I, which rises as if the first, without the rising of this I, which rises as if the first, is the state in which we exist as that. In this context, as I said earlier, nān, the word I, the first word of the main verse, refers to the ego, because its own ego is the I that rises and subsides, or appears and disappears. So in the nān means this I and implies this ego, because in the previous four verses, Bhagavan was talking specifically about the ego. So here he said, the state in which this I, the ego, doesn't rise. That's the significance of that inda, that demonstrative determiner. And then in the relative clause, the verb at the end of a relative clause, mevam, is an adjectival or relative participle form of mevu, which is a verb that means to join, appear, or manifest. So mevam means which appears, or which manifests, or which joins, which adds itself, which is added to us, as it were. And mudal pol means like the first, or as if the first. Mudal means the first, foremost, or fundamental, what is first, foremost, or fundamental. So mudal pol mevam means which appears as if the first, foremost, or fundamental thing. Because what's the significance of the pol, which means like or as if? because the real mudal, that's a real first, foremost, or fundamental thing, is actually Brahman, our own real nature, or Atma-swarupa, because it alone is what actually exists. So, though that is the real first, ego rises and poses as if the first or most important thing, namely ourself. What is most important? What is the original thing? It's only ourself. As Bhagavan, even in the very first verse of Uḷḷadu, Bhagavan uses this word mudal to refer to the ultimate reality. And he says, all phenomena, anatanam, thāṇam-adai. Avan means he, but it's referring to the mudal, the first, the fundamental reality, and that is oneself. So when Bhagavan says that this I rises as if the mudal, that means the first, foremost, or fundamental thing, he means it's rising as if it's ourself. Because what we actually are, we are the first, the original thing, the fundamental reality. So that is the first sentence. So that's a definition of what is the state denoted by Mahavakyas such as you are that, or I am Aham Brahmasmi. The state those Mahavakyas are referring to is the state in which I, this ego, does not rise. Then in the next sentence, he emphasizes that there's only one way to free ourselves from this I. Just in very much the same way that in verse 22, he said, but except by turning the mind back within, towards oneself, thereby completely immersing in God, who shines within the mind, giving light to the mind. How to fathom God by the mind? That's implying we cannot know God except by turning our mind within. Likewise, in this sentence, he asks, it's a rhetorical question, but it emphasizes that self-investigation is the only way to achieve the state in which we say to egolessness, the state in which I doesn't rise. So this sentence is nāṇudikkum thāṇam-adai nāḍāmal, nāṇudiyā taṉ-ṉiṛappai sārvadu evaṉ. That means that the first clause, nāṇudikkum thāṇam-adai nāḍāmal, without investigating the place where I rises, then the main clause is nāṇudiyāt taṉ-ṉiṛappai sārvadu evaṉ. How to reach the annihilation of oneself, taṉ-ṉiṛappai means the annihilation of oneself, nāṇudiyā, in which I does not rise. So how to attain the state of egolessness, and without investigating the place where I rises. Though Bhagavan uses the term place here, thāṇam, thāṇam is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word sthana, which means a place. He says nāṇudikkum, the place where I rises. Obviously, it doesn't mean he's not using the word place here in a literal sense. It doesn't mean a place in time or space. The place where I rises is only ourself. That is, from what does the ego rise? Only from ourself. So investigating the place where I rises means investigating ourself, our real nature, the source from which the ego rises. That place is, as I say, it's ourself, our real nature, and that is pure awareness, our fundamental self-awareness. That is the place from which I rise. But the ego always poses as if it's self-awareness, but it is a mixture of real self-awareness, what we actually are, that self-awareness and awareness of adjuncts. As Bhagavan says in Upadesha. So the ego is always posing as if it's our fundamental self-awareness, whereas actually it's just a distorted form of it. It's not what we actually are. So without investigating that fundamental self-awareness, which is the source from which this ego rises, how to reach or to achieve, or sārvadu can also mean take refuge in, the annihilation of oneself, taṉ-ṉiṛappai, the state in which I does not rise. In other words, what he's saying here is the only way to annihilate ego is to investigate oneself, the source from which it rises, because only when one investigates oneself will one see oneself as one actually is, and only when one sees oneself as one actually is will one forever cease mistaking oneself to be ego, false rising and subsiding I. So here Bhagavan is very strongly emphasizing, but there is no way to eradicate this ego except self-investigation. The reason for this is very simple. The ego is nothing but a false awareness of ourselves. An awareness of ourselves is something other than what we actually are. So how to, in other words, we could describe it as a misperception. So if an illusory snake is a misperception of a rope. So how to annihilate that misperception? How to destroy that snake, which is a misperception of the rope? The only way is to see the rope as it is, and the only way to see the rope as it is to look at it very carefully. Likewise, the only way to destroy this ego, which is a false awareness of ourself, that is an erroneous awareness of ourself, or a misperception of ourself, a perception of ourself as something other than what we actually are. The only way to annihilate it is to see to be aware of ourselves as we actually are. And the only way to be aware of ourselves as we actually are is to attend to ourselves very keenly. That is the logic in this sentence. But everyone asks it in the form of a rhetorical question, but the implication obviously is that without investigating the source from which I rises, in other words, without investigating ourselves, it is not possible to achieve taṉ-ṉiṛappai, the annihilation of oneself, the state in which this ego, doesn't rise. Then in the third sentence, he says, sārāmal taṉ-adu taṉ-nilaiyil niṛpadu evaṉ. Sārāmal means without reaching. It's referring, or without taking refuge. It's referring to the verb sārvadu in the previous sentence, where he says how to reach the annihilation of oneself. So when he says here without reaching, he means without achieving that annihilation of oneself. Taṉ-āduvān taṉ-nilaiyil niṛpadu evaṉ. How to stand in the state of oneself. That is, taṉ-nilaiyil means the state of oneself, or one's own real state. It implies one's own real state, but literally it means one's own state, or the state of oneself. Taṉ-āduvān, in which oneself is that. So how to stand, how to abide in the state in one's natural state, in which one is that, without achieving the annihilation of ego. Again, this is a rhetorical question. It means that in order to be that, in order to remain as we actually are, or to be in in our own true state, in our natural state, it is the only way is to achieve the annihilation of ego, to bring about the annihilation of ego. And the only way to bring about the annihilation of ego, as he says in the previous sentence, is to investigate what one is. So in the three sentences here, firstly, he says that the state in which we are that is only the state in which ego does not rise. Then he says the without investigating the place, the source from which I arises, how to achieve, literally it means how to reach, but it implies how to achieve the annihilation of oneself, in which I, this ego, does not rise. And then in this third sentence, without achieving that state, how to abide as one actually is in the state in which one is that. And then he ends with a single word, sārvadu. Sārvadu is the root of a verb. It means to speak, announce, proclaim, explain in detail, or say. So it means say or explain. That means explain without reaching that state of egolessness, the state in which ego has been destroyed. How is it possible to for one to abide as that? To abide in the state in which one is that. How to abide in one's own state in which one is that. So that's he's when he says say or explain, he's what he implies is, but we should think about this very carefully, and we should think, is it possible to achieve this state by any means other than self-investigation? So he wants us to think about it. When he says explain, is it possible, or explain how to achieve that state without achieving the annihilation of oneself by self-investigation. How is it possible? Obviously, we can't explain that. There's no way it's possible. So he's emphasizing the meaning. Sārvadu is the root of a verb, and often the root of verbs are used as a simple imperative. So it's used here in the sense of the imperative say or explain. But in the Kali-Vemba version, Bhagavan extended this word by adding another syllable, making it Sārvadu, which is an octative or a more polite imperative. So it means, may you say, or please explain. So please explain, how to achieve, without investigating oneself, how to reach the annihilation of oneself in which I does not rise, and without reaching that state of annihilation, how to abide in the state of oneself in which one is that. Explain that. How is it possible? So he's by adding this imperative at the end, he's challenging us. How is it possible? Obviously, we can't explain how can there be any way other than self-investigation to annihilate this ego, and without annihilating this ego, how can we abide as that? So this in this verse, Bhagavan is very, very strongly emphasizing the need for self-investigation. This is the only way for us to annihilate ego and thereby be what we actually are. So that's all the explanation of this verse. If anyone would like to ask any questions.
So the main stress in this verse is the this is it and nothing else part, right? Like the only thing, that this is the only way.
Yes, that is the only way to abide as we are that. In other words, the only way to abide as Brahman is to be in the state in which ego doesn't rise. And in order to achieve that state in which ego doesn't rise, the only way is to investigate oneself. That is the implication.
Doesn't Shankara also stress this somewhere? I guess in Vivek Shramani somewhere, doesn't he stress this point?
Yes, there is a verse, I think verse 11 or something in Vivek Shramani, where he says that this the state of Brahman cannot be achieved by any amount of karmas, any amount of action. It can only be achieved by vichara. So indirectly, he's implying the same thing there. But Bhagavan has clarified the meaning of vichara to us, whereas it was often before Bhagavan, the term vichara was often misinterpreted, particularly by pundits and scholars, to mean rather than the actual investigation of ourselves, to mean investigating in the scriptures. In other words, studying and pondering over the meaning of the scriptures. That's why there's still so many Advaitins who emphasize that the only way to achieve an authentic Advaita experience is to study the script, the Upanishads, Brahma Sutra, and Bhagavad Gita, and the commentaries on them by Shankara and others, under the guidance of someone who has studied in the same way. So they give a lot of emphasis to understanding. But obviously, Brahmanyana is more than just an understanding. Obviously, we need to have a basic understanding in order to investigate what we are. Because if we don't understand what we are not, when we try to investigate what we are, we may be attending to the mind, to the thoughts, or even to the body. So we first need to have a clear understanding of what it is we need to investigate. Not anything that appears or disappears, not body, nor mind, nor anything. It's only the I, only we. It's not any object or any phenomena. It is the subject, the perceiver of all phenomena. In other words, it's not what we need to investigate is not what is seen, but the seer of it. But the seer of all things, the perceiver of all phenomena, is ego. If we investigate this ego will subside and dissolve back into its source, and what will then remain, that is Brahmanyana. That is the true knowledge of ourself as we actually are.
A question.
Yeah.
Hey, Michael.
Yes.
Now sit down.
There you go.
Now I can see you.
Okay. It's Keva again. Well, if the self-inquiry is the only means to achieve the real self, then how did the spiritual figures from the ages, the history told us that there were so many religious figures who attained self-realization. Do you think they all practice self-inquiry? While the teaching of self-inquiry, so far I have heard only from Sri Ramana Maharshi. There is no any other scripture, there is no any other religious figure who told or teaches this self-inquiry method. So if it's the only way, so what do you think about those past religious figures?
Okay. It is, though it is that Bhagavan has expressed it in a very clear and unambiguous manner, but it is indirectly referred to in so many other religious and spiritual texts. For example, even in the Bible, Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is within you. He says something to the effect, people will say, look here, look there, but you won't find it here or there. The kingdom of heaven is lo, behold, the kingdom of heaven is within you. Lo, behold is the archaic English way of saying, look, see, the kingdom of heaven is within you. So indirectly, it is implied in so many spiritual traditions, but this is not everyone is ready for this, because this is the Bhagavan uses a term in this verse, taṉ-ṉiṛappai. That means the destruction of oneself. We have to be ready to surrender ourselves completely. So it's only for those who are already advanced in the path of self-surrender, who are truly willing to, or at least want to be willing to surrender themselves completely, who will be drawn to this path of self-investigation. There are many other spiritual paths, which the benefit of which is purification of the mind. So other sages have followed so many other paths, but eventually, how is it possible to see the sun unless you look at it? You cannot see anything without looking at it. In the same way, we cannot see what we actually are without looking at ourselves. It's so simple. So eventually, whatever other path one may follow, as the mind matures, it will become clear, but what we have to seek is within ourselves. What is the I mean, we can explain it in so many ways. What is it that stands between us and God? God is actually our own real nature. If God is the infinite whole, nothing can be other than God. So God must be what we actually are. But we seem to be separate from God. So what is it that creates this seeming separation? It's only ego, this false awareness, I am this person. By limiting ourselves as a small set of adjuncts, called a person or a body, we are thereby separating ourselves from the infinite whole, which is what we really are. So the only way to know God is to turn within and see ourselves. So we can explain it in so many ways. And even take, for example, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. He is supposed to have followed so many different paths and verified that all these different paths that he followed, they are all authentic routes to the ultimate goal. But even he said in one place in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he said, ultimately, one comes to know God only by trying to know who this I is. So it is there in all authentic spiritual traditions, but because most people aren't ready for it, it's obscured, and people fail to see it there. Like Buddha taught, when all phenomena are not oneself. When he teaches all phenomena are not oneself, then why do most forms of Buddhist meditation involve trying to be mindful of phenomena? Whether it be one's breathing or sensations in the body or whatever one's doing, these are all phenomena. These, Buddha has said, it's one of the most frequently repeated terms in the Pali text. In Pali it's sabbe dhamma anatta. In Sanskrit, the Sanskrit equivalent of that would be sarva dharma anatma. Dharma in this context means phenomena. So all phenomena are anatma. That means they're not oneself. So and that's logical, because phenomena appear and disappear. We are the one who exists there, whether phenomena appear or not. If phenomena appear in waking and dream, they don't appear in sleep. But we are there in all three states. So no phenomena can be what we actually are. So when Buddha emphasized that so strongly, but we are not any phenomena, why should we meditate on phenomena? Surely we should, if we want to know what is true, we should meditate on ourselves. Because phenomena are all impermanent, they all cause of dukkha. They're anicca or nitya, and they're dukkha. There's suffering, unsatisfactoriness. So if we want to be free of suffering, if we want to be free of temporary things, we have to know what is permanent. That is ourself. And we ourselves are not any phenomena. So indirectly, it's explained in so many ways. In the Jewish tradition, the most sacred name of God is I am. Because when God appeared to Moses in the form of a burning bush and told him to go back and tell the Pharaoh to release the Israelites, Moses said, "But who shall I say you has sent me?" And God then says, "I am that I am." So for the Jews, the most sacred name is I am. And that is why Jesus was persecuted, because he used the term I am. He said, before Abraham was born, I am. For the ancient Jews, that was sacrilege. That was taking the name of the Lord in vain. So all these clues are there, but we're able to recognize these clues because Bhagavan has made it so clear in his very simple and clear teachings. But even though before Bhagavan, the clearest exposition of these things was Advaita philosophy. But even Advaita philosophy was misunderstood by people in so many ways. It had become so complex, and there were so many different interpretations of, even among the followers of Shankara, there were different schools of thought arose with different interpretations. But Bhagavan has made things so simple, and by writing Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and nāṇya, he's left us with no room for doubt what is the correct interpretation. So we are truly very blessed to have Bhagavan to come and show us the path so clearly, so unequivocally, and to emphasize it so strongly as he does in this verse and in verse 22. This is the only way. And it's logical, because how can we know ourselves without investigating ourselves?
You see, we take it for granted, all of us here, but it doesn't click for everybody.
No.
It doesn't click for everybody. I think we really are fortunate to have found Bhagavan, and at the very least, there are ways to get self-realized, but at least we are understanding it.
Yes.
That is itself is a very fortunate thing. When I say fortunate, that really doesn't cut it. I think it is extremely rare.
Yeah, but
this crowd here, we have a city of 6 million people, and that just shows how rare.
Yeah, because many people are at different levels of spiritual development, so this path will not appeal to all people. Even among the devotees of Bhagavan, it is actually a minority who are truly devoted to his teachings. Most of us devotees of Bhagavan prefer to worship Bhagavan as a god, and they don't really want to be reminded of his teachings, because his teachings are really radical.
And that this really makes me like sort of an emotional,
Yes.
And that's just that idea that it is sinking into me. I want to keep stressing to myself that it is not as common, and we want to make use out of it. We want to make use out of it, and who knows what we will be in next year.
Exactly. But the very fact that we're attracted to this path, and the fact that we are making at least a little effort, Bhagavan said every little effort we make in this path, not even a single effort made in this path will go in vain. Every effort we make is taking us one step closer to our own destruction. to taṉ-ṉiṛappai.
Okay, well, sorry, do you want to make a comment on the follow?
Well, thank you, Michael. One more question.
No thanks to me. All thanks go to Bhagavan. He's the one who has given us this treasure.
Yes. Well, in light of, to follow up that, your explanations earlier about the self-enquiry is the only mean. Now, to what extent do you think the practice of the Patanjali Yoga Sutra can help in practicing self-enquiry meditation?
To tell you the truth, I don't really know. I've got a vague idea about, I mean, I've read parts of the Yoga Sutra, that the path of Raja Yoga has never appealed to me. And all this pranayama and all these things, it doesn't appeal to me, and it seems to me very, well, having come into Bhagavan, it's completely unnecessary. But obviously, I think the main tributary, but and that is the ultimate river that will carry us to the ocean of infinite bliss, our real nature. The only river that will lead us directly there is self-investigation. All other paths are like tributaries to this river. The main tributary, I would say, is the path of bhakti. Bhakti is the easiest and quickest way to come to this path of self-investigation. And truly speaking, this path of self-investigation, this is the culmination of the path of bhakti. Because bhakti leads to self-surrender. And self-surrender can be complete only with self-investigation. So bhakti is certainly the main tributary, the main means to purify the mind to come to this path. But the path of bhakti requires a certain simplicity, a certain trust. For people who are not of that trusting, devotional type, they feel I must do. So people with a strong sense of doership, I think possibly that is why this Raja Yoga path is prescribed. But there's lots to do. If you read the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, you've got pranayama and different stages of meditation, dharana, this, that. I can't remember all the terms, but I mean, it is very complex, but it's there's lots of work for us to do if we want to follow Raja Yoga. So for people with a strong sense of doership, people who aren't willing to yield themselves with simple love to God, for them maybe that is why this Patanjali Yoga Sutra is meant for such people. But even in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, he does at one point indirectly refer, I mean, he does refer to an alternative path, which is, I've forgotten the term used in, but he uses in Sanskrit, but basically it is surrender to God. He said that it can also be achieved by surrender to God. So rather than doing all this yoga, much, well, I don't know, for me at least, a much more appealing path is the path of surrender. And the path of surrender leads directly to this self-investigation, because we can, to some extent, by devotion to God, we can, to some extent, surrender our likes and dislikes, our desires, our attachments, our hopes, our fears, and so on, but only to a certain extent, because so long as the root of all these passions are there, they will continue sprouting. And the root of all these things is ego. So surrender can be complete only when we surrender ego. And how to surrender ego? As Bhagavan said, ego is nothing but a wrong awareness of ourselves. And awareness of ourselves is something other than what we are. So we can surrender ego only by knowing what we actually are. So surrender has to lead eventually to a path of vichara, which is the perfect form of surrender. As Bhagavan says in the first sentence of the 13th paragraph of Nāṇa, who am I, being steadfastly remaining as Atma-vichara param, that is one who is firmly established in oneself, giving not even the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than Atma-chintana. Atma-chintana literally means the thought of oneself, but it implies self-attentiveness, is giving oneself to God. So not giving room to any thought other than self-attentiveness is alone giving oneself to God, is what Bhagavan says there. So he clearly defines that self-surrender, surrender can be complete only by means of self-investigation. So he emphasizes it in so many ways.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
Hi, Michael. This is Kathy. I know that words sometimes trip me up when I am investigating myself. But so the word investigation makes me automatically, my brain starts working. That's the thing I don't want to happen. My brain to start working in that way. So is there, I know, so when you say investigation, is it investigating or looking into my ego to dissect it and figure it out? Or is it not allowing the ego to rise? So I just want to be clear about when you say investigation, what that actually means.
Well, the basic tool of any investigation is observation or attention. If we're investigating something other than ourselves, in addition to attention, we also need our mind, our five senses. Or if we're scientists investigating something, we may need all sorts of instruments. We may need telescopes and microscopes and all sorts of things. But whatever investigation is done, even, for example, a police investigation, they've got to pay attention to the facts. They've got to observe what is what the evidence is. So in any investigation, the basic tool is observation. But in this self-investigation, we don't need our five senses. We don't need thoughts. We don't need mind. We only need observation. In other words, attention. So self-investigation is nothing but self-attentiveness. Carefully observing ourselves. You say preventing the ego from rising. The ego rises, as Bhagavan explains in verse 25, which we talked about a couple of months ago. The ego rises, as Bhagavan describes it there, by grasping form. What he means by grasping form, the ego, he says, is a formless phantom. So grasping form means grasping anything other than itself. But as a formless phantom, it's not grasping by hands or legs or something, because it doesn't have any hands or legs. We grasp things by being aware of them. In other words, we grasp them in our awareness. So by being aware of anything other than ourselves, we are grasping. So by being aware of anything other than ourselves, we rise as ego. So how to prevent the rising of ego? Not to attend to anything other than ourselves. Only by attending only to ourselves, we bring about the subsidence of ego. So if we want to avoid the rising of ego, we have to vigilantly watch the ego. Because this ego is a treacherous thing. It will pop out when we are not looking at it. But when we're looking at it, it hides away. So if we want to prevent the rising of ego, self-attentiveness is the only way.
Okay.
Does that make it any clearer?
It does. And I say this all the time. Oftentimes I'm right on it, you know, and then sometimes I think this is just too simple. Then my mind goes somewhere. It can't be this simple. So yeah, I do get it. I just have to stay in that place. And sometimes I make it more difficult for myself.
Yes. What is the state of ultimate simplicity? The state of oneness, or the state of not two-ness, is ultimate simplicity. Where there's no two, there's only one. That is perfect simplicity. So Advaita is simple. It is perfectly simple. It's made complicated by our mind, because our mind thrives on complexity. So the mind will always rebel against simplicity. But simplicity is the way. Simple love, simple surrender, simple investigation. It is so simple. There's nothing to do, just be. But in order to just be, we have to be very vigilant to avoid rising as I. And to avoid rising as I, we have to vigilantly watch this ego. Because as soon as we take our eyes off it, it pops up. Yeah. And we're no longer in the state of just being.
I'm thinking I should be there by now. I didn't realize. But okay, thank you.
We should be there. The reason we are not there, according to Bhagavan, this path is the easiest of all paths. So why does it seem so difficult to us? Because we are not yet ready to surrender ourselves. We must be whole. We must have all-consuming love to surrender ourselves. When we get that all-consuming love, then that is the end of the story. And how to cultivate that all-consuming love? By trying to investigate what we are, by trying to be self-attentive. Because every time we turn our attention back to ourselves, at every moment in our life, we're faced with a choice. Either we can be attending to other things, or we can be attending to ourselves. By attending to other things, we're feeding ego. By attending to ourselves, we are weakening, we are starving ego and its vasanas. So every effort we make to attend to ourselves, as Bhagavan said, not a single effort in this path goes in vain. Every effort we make is taking us one step closer to our own destruction, our own complete surrender. Because the more we attend to ourselves, the more willing we become to give ourselves entirely to Bhagavan.
Yeah.
So this is this path of vichara, of self-investigation. This is the ultimate. This is the culmination of the path of bhakti. This is the ultimate path of love.
Because I'm really that. I just don't realize I'm that.
Exactly. You're
right.
And why you don't realize it? Because you're not yet willing to let go of everything else. Not just you, all of us. We're all in the same boat.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Does anybody want to ask it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Michael, I'm asking about a different things right now. I watch your latest videos on YouTube with the Spanish-speaking people. The latest one. You talked about the life after death. And there you mentioned that so long as we still exist as an ego, after death, we could either go to heaven or hell. And then we go there as a subtle body. But I remember that when we say body Bhagavan used to say that it includes all the pancha koshas, not only the subtle body, including the physical body. So if we are in heaven or in hell, it means that while we are there, we also assume a physical body. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes. Well, I don't think I said either we go to heaven or hell. What I said is either we fall asleep or we start another dream. When one dream comes to an end, there are two alternatives: either another dream or sleep. Because even what we now call waking is just a dream. So actually there are only two states. There's dream and there's sleep. So when this dream, the death of this body is just the ending of a dream, because our whole life is a dream. So when a dream comes to an end, either we fall asleep or we have another dream. If we have another dream, we may dream that we're in heaven or we may dream that we're in hell, but it's all, both heaven and hell are as much a dream as our present life. In one of the explanations given, a very, very popular explanation given in Advaita, is that in waking state, we have the gross body, whereas in dream state, it's the subtle body. But according to Bhagavan, waking is nothing but a dream. And now we say this body we have is a gross body, whereas the body we experience as ourself in a dream is just a subtle body. Why we make that distinction? Because now this body seems to be real. That dream body seems to us just to be a figment of our imagination. So we say it's a subtle body. But when we are dreaming, we seem to be awake. So when we're dreaming, the dream body seems to be the gross body. So this gross and subtle, it's all a matter of perspective. Always our current body, in our current dream, the body of our current dream seems to be a gross body. The bodies we experience as ourselves in other dreams seem to us now to be mental projections, so subtle bodies. But actually, they're all equally gross and equally subtle. Bhagavan actually used the term subtle body in another sense, having nothing to do with the five sheaths. In fact, Bhagavan said the body is a form of five sheaths. So whatever body we experience as ourselves always has all the five sheaths. So it always seems to us that our present body is a physical body and it's alive. So that's the pranamaya kosha. And it's we're aware of it. So the manomaya kosha is there. That we're distinguishing things. So the vijnanamaya kosha is there. And we have likes and dislikes and everything. That's the anandamaya kosha. So all the five sheaths are there in any body. A body is a form composed of these five sheaths. But in traditional Vedanta, as I say, they refer to the Annamaya kosha as stula sarira, gross body. The Pranamaya kosha, Manomaya kosha, and Vijnanamaya kosha as sukshma sarira, subtle body. And the Anandamaya kosha as karana sarira, causal body. Bhagavan doesn't attach a lot of importance to this sort of, in fact, Bhagavan says, all this type of analysis is just like analyzing the hair in a barber shop. It all needs to be swept up and thrown away. We don't have to analyze how many black hairs, how many gray hairs, how many red hairs, how many blonde hairs, which hair came from which person. All this analysis is unnecessary. Sweep it up and throw it away. So because Bhagavan had so little regard for this type of subtle body, gross body classification, Bhagavan said, actually, all bodies are whatever body we experience as ourselves is gross. What he refers to as subtle body is ego. In verse 24 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, when he's describing the ego, he says this is chitjadagranti, ego, bondage, nupame. Nupame means subtle body. So Bhagavan uses the word subtle body to refer to ego. He also uses it in Nāṇya. He said this is called the subtle body. So Bhagavan doesn't have much regard for all this type of the so-called traditional or orthodox classifications. But the problem is not the body or any of the five sheaths. The problem is the ego who takes this body to be I. That is the root of problem. That is what we have to deal with. So that's all that Bhagavan is concerned about. He's not concerned about the not self. He's concerned about what we actually are.
So does it mean while we are in heaven or hell, we actually experiencing phenomena just like what we are experiencing in this waking state?
You can never be in heaven and hell. Heaven and hell are in you. Just like this present world is in you. Because we take ourselves to be a body, we feel we're in this world. But actually this whole world is in our mind. So heaven and hell are just as much in our mind as any other world. Where is the dream world? It doesn't exist outside us, it exists within us. But while we are dreaming, it seems to be outside us. We seem to be in that dream world. But actually the whole dream world is in us. Likewise, any world, whether it's heaven or hell or this world or whatever, it's all in us. Because it's all our own mental projection.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
As I say, all thanks to Bhagavan. I am just saying what little I've learned from Bhagavan. And what we learn from Bhagavan is the art of unlearning, the art of jettisoning all our old beliefs and ideas and simplifying our understanding.
All concepts. Any other questions? Silence.
I have a quick question.
Yes, sure. Yeah, you do.
Hi, Michael. For a number of years, I did a practice called centering prayer, and one of the simple aspects of that was letting go of thoughts, just letting go. And sometimes I find that in the very beginning of my practice of self-attention, that if I let go, even just for a few seconds or a minute or so, that I'm stopping the whirling attachment to my thoughts. And so I'm finding that helpful. But I didn't know whether that was something that people generally did, or that was an obstacle, or unnecessary in your view, or.
Yes, letting go is very, very important. We need to let go of everything we can let go of. But there's one thing we cannot let go of. What is the one thing we can never let go
of? The ego and
the self?
No, yeah, we cannot let go of ourselves, can we?
Okay.
So we have to let go of everything else, including ego.
Oh, okay.
So the whole spiritual path is all about letting go. Letting go of what is not real and holding on to what is real. And what is real? You are that.
Okay.
So by holding on to yourself, you need to let go of everything else.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. So even simultaneously with letting go and the beginning of my practice, I can be simultaneously holding on to my I am.
The very nature of ego is holding. As Bhagavan said, ego comes into existence by grasping form, by holding on to form.
Okay.
It stands by holding on to form. by holding and feeding on forms, it flourishes. So holding is the very nature of ego. Attaching is the very nature of ego. But so we can't be without attaching ourselves to something. So rather than, in order to give up our attachment to all other things, we have to attach ourselves to ourselves. This is, it sounds funny when we say it in words, but the words are just pointing. We hold on to other things by attending to them. So we must hold on to ourselves by attending only to ourselves. The more we attend to ourselves, the more we let go of everything else.
Okay, I see. Okay, thank you.
Right. And when we've let go of everything else, what remains?
The self.
Not the self. You yourself. You alone remain. Because as soon as we say the self, it sounds like it's something other than ourselves. It's we ourselves.
Myself.
He's given up.
But Michael, how are we to hold on to this something real while it is intangible?
When we say holding on, we're not physically holding on. We're not trying to catch it with our hands, are we? We are holding by our awareness. So though it is intangible, we are always aware of it because we are that. Is there any moment when you're not aware of yourself?
Yes, when we are sleeping.
No, even when you're sleeping, you're aware of yourself. Because you say, when we are sleeping, who is sleeping? I am sleeping. I was sleeping. So in sleep, we are not aware of anything, but we are still aware. And the state of being aware entails being aware of ourself. But ourself obviously isn't an object that we are aware of. Self-awareness is the very nature of awareness. Because awareness is always aware, I am aware. So by being aware, but I am aware, we are aware of ourselves. But problem is, when we try to express it in words, in language, it always sounds dualistic, like we're aware of ourselves, as if ourself was something, an object that we're aware of. But obviously ourself cannot be an object, but we are always self-aware. We all know I am. There is never a moment when we don't know I am. So we have to try to be aware only of ourselves. In other words, we have to try to be attentively self-aware. Focus all our attention only on our fundamental self-awareness. That is clinging to the intangible.
Okay, thank you. Diti has question.
Okay. I can go to focus there. You can sit there. Yeah, all
Hi, Michael.
Yes.
How are you doing? Excuse me.
A lot of people are having allergies here. The pollen count is very high in Houston right now.
Okay. We all need an analogy. We need allergy to ego.
Yeah, right. That's what we need. Right. So.
Don't make me laugh. Excuse me, sorry. I hope you'll delete this. Don't put this online.
No, it's going online.
No, please. Michael, to be very honest with you, all of this sounds very lofty and idealistic because even a little cold has thrown my whole equilibrium off. I'm so attached to this physical frame, and so when my mind is foggy, my attention is not on the awareness. So it just seems like even a little thing like a cold can throw this whole thing off. And it just seems that so silly that here we are just talking about this stuff when I'm just not there. I'm still so entangled with this entity that it just doesn't seem real.
What you are saying, you're describing the state of all of us. For all of us, this body seems to be ourself, and it seems so real. But slowly, by following Bhagavan's path of self-investigation and self-surrender, we are slowly weaning our mind away from its attachment to everything, including the attachment to the person that we seem to be. So though it may seem all very lofty and very idealistic, if we aspire towards that, if we try to, and it's not actually lofty or idealistic, it is you. You yourself are that.
But to access that, I feel like I need this. If this unit is muddled or mired in some kind of nonsense, then I'm not able to access that because I feel like I don't have access without going through this mechanism.
Well, you don't actually need this. In sleep, you have access to yourself, don't you? Without this body or mind. But now we have this body and mind, so we're trying to get rid of this. So we use the mind to turn it, instead of turning it outwards to know other things, we try to turn it within to know ourselves. That is the way to free ourselves from it.
So when my mind is not attending to myself, what happens to myself?
Nothing happens to yourself ever. You remain the same. Whatever mischief your mind may be doing, you remain the same.
But the only way to access myself is through my attention to myself, which is using the mind.
Even to say access yourself, we're using these terms, but you don't need access to yourself. You are yourself. But you need to try to hold on to yourself in order to let go of everything else.
Right, and that holding on requires that clarity of mind and attention, right?
It does. And that clarity will come slowly as we persevere in this practice. We are all like small children learning to toddle. We get up on our feet, we take 1 or 2 steps and we fall down. But no child toddles forever. The more we try toddling, the steadier we become on our feet. And after some time, we can't imagine how we could ever not walk. It seems walking is so natural to us. So it doesn't matter if we're toddling now, let us toddle. But let us persevere in our toddling. Let's not give up.
It comes down to not giving up.
Exactly. Patience and perseverance is all that is required. Because patience and perseverance, they are the sign of love. And love is the driving force on this path. That's why Bhagavan said, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. Without bhakti, without real love, there can be no self-investigation, no spiritual path at all. But we need to strengthen that love. And the way to strengthen that love is by patient, persevering practice. So it is all so simple. All that is required is willingness.
Willingness and persistence.
Yeah. Well, when willingness is there, the persistence comes automatically.
Right.
If you have a strong love to achieve something, you will
do it.
you will go on doing it till you succeed. So love is the driving force.